Architecture is made of shape, color, space, and structure. My passion is for the impact these spaces have on each and every one of us. The important thing is not only what a city or building looks like, but the way the built world shapes how we interact with each other.
Mr. Goldstein in general, he's introduced me to a lot of firms, new people, just a whole different mindset.
Cities are designed. The question is for whom? Most people just walk about the city and they think it has to be that way. The way we change that in a more progressive way that overcomes issues of institutional racism and economic segregation and things like that is through education.
In terms of CityLab, we use the city as our classroom. And the students here work on real-world projects that are multidisciplinary. And the goal is to have them engage with industry partners and with the world where they live, learn, work, and play.
It's right in the middle of the city. You can walk to the National, walk to City Hall.
I feel like it'd be a lot of pressure when you're in a big school and there's less flexibility and it's more straightforward. You do this and there's no say in it. Where at CityLab, it's like you have a closer relationship with them.
They're learning about how our government works, how our communities are being designed, why do they look the way they look right now, all the provisions in our streets, in our landscape, in our plazas, how all of those were decisions that were made by someone, and ultimately how they could impact those decisions, how they can really raise their hand, raise their voice directly with decision makers.
And that changes the course of how Dallas will develop. Being able to engage design in your teenage years, it kind of demystifies it while also creating an allure and a kind of romantic relationship with what can happen.
Thank you for joining us for our summit this year. I want to tell you just briefly about CityLab High School. CityLab High School is located in downtown Dallas, and we are a Dallas ISD choice high school that serves students that are interested in design thinking and project-based learning. Our students are also interested in architecture, environmental sustainability, and urban planning. So our coursework and pathways follow those subject areas. I want to tell you today, we have the beautiful summit in front of you, and the summit is an opportunity where our professionals and students come together, and you'll hear more about our particular that we did this year, but the students are going to be sharing their app with you. They created an app for Fair Park, and they will be sharing that with you, and you'll hear more of it throughout the event here. The summit is divided into two parts. The first part is a panel discussion, and the second part is breakout rooms. And after the panel, we invite you to join into one of two sub rooms, breakout rooms, which will each host 4 of our tour stops. And each stop will be reviewed for 10 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes on the actual stops, its creation partners, and the remainder questions and answers you may have. So that'll be an opportunity for you to interact with the students. I do invite you to do that after our panel discussion. So before I go further, I want to introduce a new video to you. I don't think you've seen it, but this is our Teacher of the Year last year, Mary Nunley, and she was also a district finalist Teacher of the Year. So we were very proud of her. She even had her own billboard last year, so you may recognize her. But it'll give you a little insight into what our teachers do and the work here at CityLab.
I hope that my students go out into the world with a few specific skills. One in particular is just having empathy for others. Another is being resilient, and I would say focusing on the relationships that they build along the way. I think that those things can come together so that they can be impactful problem solvers in whatever field that they choose to go into, or whatever they do with their life. Oftentimes teachers might ask students for feedback at the end of a lesson or end of a unit to make changes for the future. And one thing I've started to do is to do that at the beginning. So talk to them about what we're going to be learning or what's coming up next week and my ideas for where we might go with that lesson and get their feedback ahead of time. I like doing that because I think that it engages them earlier on, and also I can adjust based on their feedback if they let me know, something might be more interesting for them to learn than what I was planning. Innovative thinking and teaching is something that I've been, focused on and working to develop over time, especially at CityLab, specifically within the realm of project-based learning. I think that project-based learning is one of the, in my experience, most innovative models that we can bring to students because of the benefits for both the student and the teacher to co-create those experiences along the way. I love seeing how students can take a project and make it their own. I love, seeing them present at the end. And so I think that there are some components of project-based learning that are especially innovative, and I always aim to bring that into my teaching.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that little insight into CityLab and one of our best. So with all that said, I would like to introduce you now to one of our outstanding seniors. His name is Paul Bagley, and he will be telling you a little more about the summit and introducing our panel today. Thank you.
Paul Bagley. I'm a senior at CityLab High School, and I'm on the architecture pathway. First, I'd like to thank all the sponsors and mentors that have helped get us here today. Part one of the panel will be a group discussion with industry experts, and part two is where we'll roll out our AutoCAD Fair app after we do the panel discussion. Mr. James is the president of KI and has built a staff reflective on his commitment to inclusion and the conviction that a diverse, talented team is crucial to transforming communities. For more than 40 years, KI is focused on designing for under-resourced neighborhoods such as Fair Park and South Oak Cliff in Dallas, working tirelessly to engage resident stakeholders to make a lasting impact. Mr. James grew up in St. Louis and is a graduate of the University of Kansas School of Architecture and Urban Design. Among his many honors, he is the recipient of the William Sidney Pittman Award for the Texas African American Association of Chambers of Commerce and this year's award for the Equitable Practice in Architecture from the Society of Architects. Mr. James is a civic leader promoting equity and inclusion through his roles as the president of Fair Park's first chair of the Black Chamber of Commerce. Oh, I did? Sorry. Mr. James, we're honored to have you join us at the 2021 CityLab Summit.
Thanks a lot, Paul. I'm really honored to be here. I want to introduce my co-moderators, Bella Oliver and Dylan Mitchell. If you guys could at least acknowledge that you're with me today.
I am here.
All right, Dylan. Bella?
I am here.
All right, cool. All right, the purpose of this conversation is to kind of feed off of what Kimberly Dowdell spoke about last night, which was how does design, the built and unbuilt environment show what an equitable community looks like, or an unequitable or inequity looks like, and how can we as architects, planners, and policymakers kind of impact what's going on in the future. So we're gonna dive into that with the panel of experts we have today. One of the things we really want to talk about is specifically Fair Park and how we can look at the surrounding neighborhoods, celebrate the unique history, as well as the diverse history of the community, which speaks to some of that inequity. And then how do we look to the future and how you as students can be part of that solution. And the one last thing we want to talk about as the students is, what is your mission statement and what do you bring to the table? What is your contribution to that? So I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Dylan first.
Actually, Bella, you're first.
If we could actually have the introduction of the panelists, that would be great.
I'm sorry. Let's go with introduction of our panel, Desiree Powell.
I just showed you.
My name is Desiree Powell. I'm an urban planner and urban designer based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I am currently in the city of Port Arthur, and I operate my own urban planning and design group called DRBTS, or Do Right by the Streets.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Can we go with Dr. Francois Booker Drew?
Good morning. I'm Francois Booker Drew. I serve as Vice President of Community Affairs and Strategic Alliances for the State Fair of Texas. I'm also the proud co-founder of Heritage Giving Circle, which is one of the first Black women giving circles in the state of Texas.
Mr. Brian Graham.
Good morning. I'm Brian Graham. I'm an architect and project manager with LPA. I'm also have the pleasure of being the 2021-2022 chapter president for DFW NOMA. And lastly, I'm a member of the inaugural class of the AIA National Leadership Academy, which is comprised of 18 architects from around the nation.
Great. And then we'll go to David.
Yes, David Noguera. Good morning, everyone. I serve as the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization for the City of Dallas. And in this role, I use the city's resources to invest in the development and preservation of existing housing.
Thank you. As you see, this is a pretty robust panel, and I'm going to ask Bella to ask our first question.
Hi, I'm Bella Oliver. I'm a senior in the architecture pathway and an old resident of Fair Park. And this is for Darren James. Could you please give us a quick, brief background about Fair Park, please?
Okay, so Fair Park was founded in 1886 as fairgrounds, and it served as the host of actually two kind of county/state fairs. In 1904, the two, or let's say early 1900s, the two organizations came together and established their one unique state fair, and they gifted the land to the city of Dallas, and Parks and Rec took over management of Fair Park. It was originally bounded by Pennsylvania Avenue, Perry Avenue, and Second Avenue, and then Washington Street. And over the years, it became a larger and larger commitment to the community, as well as an asset for the Dallas Parks and Rec system. In 1936, in celebration of the centennial of the independence of Texas, the city of Dallas decided that they wanted to host that centennial celebration, and they went down to Austin and were able to negotiate, and they held the Centennial Exposition in 1936. And most of the buildings that you see, which are Texanic architecture, kind of based in Art Deco style, were built around that time by architect George Dahl, who had a host of other architects working for him, but he was the master architect, and he kind of established a style in what you see today with the Hall of State, which is one of the most iconic state facilities in the state of Texas, as well as worldwide, which was just recently restored, was built for that celebration. And then the State Fair continued to grow out of that. It became the home of some of the largest cultural institutions, the Dallas Museum of Art, the Museum of Nature and Science, as well as a host of other cultural assets, the Children's Aquarium, Texas Discovery Garden, until we got to a point in the late 70s where a lot of those organizations needed to look for other places to where they could kind of grow and spread their wings. So there was kind of an exodus in the late 70s, early 80s, all the way through early 2000, which led to a few master plans, 2003 update by Mayor Rollins in 2014, which birthed the desire to have a nonprofit lead it. And that happened in 2018, which is the organization that I am president of, is Fair Park First. So we are the nonprofit manager for Fair Park as an asset that is still owned and operated by the city, as the caretaker of the 277 acres that sits in Southeast Dallas, which is the host of 11 cultural institutions, including the State Fair Texas, Daughters of American Revolution, Texas Historical Society, and a host of others, African American Museum. And so we are the crown jewel of the park system, and we are working very diligently to re-energize and activate the space on a year-round basis. So it's not just activated on a few peak times. State Fair is one of the biggest, but there's also EarthX and Irish Fest and Pride Fest. So there's a lot of other activities that happen at State Fair. And Rolling Stones may be a little bit old for this crowd, but they were just at the park. So there's a lot of activities going on. So I think that's a brief history of Fair Park. So I'll turn it over to Dylan.
Good morning. My name is Dylan Mitchell. I am a junior here at CityLab High School, and I am in the architecture pathway. My first question is for Mrs. Powell. How can we balance growth at Fair Park and protect the surrounding communities?
It's a great question. So the biggest thing is being able to encapsulate and cultivate the community that's there. As far as them being a part of that growth, a lot of what you hear now, the G word, as we call it in planning, or gentrification, a lot of the existing residents in Fair Park are quite nervous in the sense of once this new development, once this new life comes, that they may be left out of the equation. So being able to maintain that while growing is a big part of keeping that culture, keeping those people and keeping those resources there. That way they can benefit on whatever Fair Park brings in the sense of activation year round, outside of bigger and larger events like Mr. James mentioned. So to me, a big part of that is community engagement, community building, and community trust.
That's a great answer, Mrs. Powell. One of the things that we at Fair Park, as well as our friends at the State Fair, do is very actively engage the communities. We've determined that there's 24 distinct neighborhoods around Fair Park, and so we've had over 700 conversations to make sure that they're part of that future. Bella, you want to ask the next question?
Yes. Okay. This question is for Mr. Noguera. How will housing change the landscape of Fair Park? What is the plan? What is the city's plan to input on the revitalization?
Great. Well, thank you for that question, Bella. Can you hear me? Great. All right. So for many of you who have spent some time at Fair Park, you'll know that there are a lot of vacant lots around the park. Most of these are used for parking during the state fair, but some of them are just historically vacant. What you're going to start to see, and some of it's already happened, is that those lots are going to become developed. You will see apartments being built on them, condominiums being built on them, you'll see townhomes being built on them. The one common theme that you'll see is density, where the housing stock that's coming in will be closer together. There'll be more units to create a greater sense of community, right? It's taken a long time to get here, and part of it has been because there hasn't been year-round activity happening at Fair Park. But with Fair Park First coming in and the new plans to create a venue that hosts year-round activities, there's a greater demand to offer housing and to create a sense of community in and around Fair Park. One of the themes that you'll see from the city for any development that we are participating in is mixed income housing. What is mixed income housing? Well, essentially what it means is that it's housing that serves people at a range of incomes. In the city of Dallas, the median income is about $55,000 a year, right? When we talk about mixed income housing, we're talking about folks who may be making a portion of that. Maybe they're making $20,000, $25,000 a year, upwards to that $55,000 limit. The goal there is to help those at the lower end of the income spectrum, while bringing in new residents who are at the higher ends of that spectrum. So definitely stay on the lookout. You're seeing some of this happening now. I was there at the State Fair this year and saw a new condo development. It was relatively small. I want to say it was about 10 units that popped up. But as some of the property owners who rent out their land for parking during the fair start to sell those lots or work with developers to build it out, those are the kinds of developments I expect to see happening around the park.
This is Powell from a urban planning standpoint. Can you expand on what Mr. Nagara said?
As far as for housing?
Yes.
So from a planning standpoint, sometimes it makes it challenging to provide new housing, to provide mixed housing or mixed income housing, like he mentioned, in Fair Park in particular, in the sense of you do see vacant lots that, in today's planning policies and standards, they don't meet what we require today, whether that's the size of the lot or how many units you can put on the lot. So it's a good change to see. It's a transitional change, not just from a community standpoint, but also from the planning profession as far as development can happen. And it's going to look different for every community. As he mentioned, the average household median income in South Dallas and Fair Park varies, from $20,000 to possibly beyond six figures. So being able to be flexible with our planning policies is something that's pushing on us as planners to understand that every development is not going to be cut and dry, black and white. There's going to be gray, and being understanding of how to make that work in communities that need it the most.
I appreciate that. I really like what David said about the future is changing, and I wanted to bring the public-private partnership back to those conversations, because I know he's looking at the legacy residents, protecting the legacy residents, but also looking to the future. And I just wanted you to impart some of your urban planning thoughts into that conversation. So I appreciate you two both for answering that question. Dylan, I think the next question is for you.
This question is for Mr. Graham. How can architects best balance preservation and renovation of iconic buildings with modernization that continues to make Fair Park dynamic?
Thank you, Dylan, for that question. That's a great question. I think Ms. Dowdell last night in her keynote alluded to two things, which were climate action and social equity. And so I think any conversation about preservation and modernization, renovation, especially for Fair Park, has to take those two kind of overarching themes into account. So as architects, we're not lone soldiers. We come with a team of designers, consultants to the process. So we bring sort of a certain design expertise. But community involvement is really important, as Darren mentioned earlier, about the numerous conversations with community groups, neighborhoods around Fair Park, because they have the institutional, kind of the neighborhood and the historical knowledge of the place. So we have to figure out, how do we work together to shape the future of the built environment around Fair Park? And in terms of Fair Park, again, how do we activate the site year round? So from an architectural standpoint, knowing that the most sustainable building is the one already built. Now, how do we transform these iconic buildings, which are close to 100 years old, to allow them to perform to modern standards? And so it's really taking a holistic approach and not simply looking at just the buildings, but how do these buildings occupy the space, and how does the spaces around them kind of reflect and affect the greater context in the neighborhood. And so it's really about placemaking and preserving the character and enhancing the functionality for longevity for these buildings. And we know as architects, we're under kind of a design constraint for the 2030 challenge, which really starts to look at sustainability and making buildings net zero. So how do we use these existing buildings to promote their highest and best use so that they have longevity going forward? As someone who's not a Dallas native, for me, when I used to visit Dallas, when I was younger, two places really stood out to me as Dallas. It was really the West End and Fair Park. And so, Fair Park's kind of iconic, Art Deco style, now it being a National Historic Landmark, really, stuck out as kind of one of the centerpieces of Dallas for me. So how do we, in a preservation conversation, maintain that iconography of the place, but implement, sustainable energy-saving measures that will improve the existence of the buildings there, again, to make it viable for year-round activity? And really, kind of boils down to upgrading the infrastructure of the systems of the buildings. That includes, the roofs, the plumbing, electrical, HVAC systems of the buildings to bring them up to modern standards so that they're supporting, extended, human use, that they're viable year round. And it's really about just, if you look at it overall, making Fair Park a place that's of the community and not just in the community. So how do we activate the site, instituting the park back into Fair Park? And so that's why I appreciate, the things that Fair Park First and the groups that are involved in the master plan are doing with implementing park systems back into Fair Park that are active and utilized by the community, which again, kind of harks back, highlights one of the things that Ms. Dowdell mentioned last night, which is about, community health. And that really starts to kind of enliven and allows interaction with the space year round. Starts to address some of those concerns about disinvestment in the community, which leads to pollutants and things that nature, which promote asthma and all of those things. And so implementing green spaces back into the park is really important.
That's a good point. What we found is during the height of the pandemic, I know we're not quite through the end of it yet, that social equity and green spaces were highly utilized because people wanted to get out and spread out, not only do the social distancing, but they also needed to get away from just being in their houses all the time. And we saw a lot more use at Fair Park. There was a lot more activity in the limited green space. We do recognize that there's some heat islands because of the immense number of the immense acreage of blacktop and concrete and hard surfaces. So we're looking at green in the park. So I appreciate you thinking about the master plan, but that was born out of community conversations. And I like Dr. Drew to kind of weigh in on some of the things that she's seen as well.
When I started in 2016, one of the things that I wanted to be very mindful of is listening to community. Because even though I had worked at the Craft House and South Dallas Culture Center and Museum and a number of other places, I did not want to take for granted that I knew what the community needed. And so what I did was really go around and do this listening tour to find out what are the things that rose to the surface. And so as a result, there were three things that kept coming up. It was employment and thinking about businesses and education and capacity building for our nonprofits. And so one of the things that I would say in this conversation that's so important is, as we talk about community engagement, it really is listening. It's so easy to go into communities and prescribe what we think should happen, even if we are people of color and identify and have similar lived experiences. We cannot say that we understand everything and that communities are monolithic. So I think that's one. I think the other thing is it's important for us to recognize that there are cultural and historical dynamics that exist in communities, and we cannot take that for granted. As we're doing community engagement, it's very important that we're aware of all of those dynamics that make a community the way that it is, and recognizing the obstacles and systemic barriers that exist. And then the other thing I think is important in this conversation is we talk about community engagement. It really is looking at how do we map assets and making sure that we are not just looking at, as I call it, the usual suspects, the really big entities that we partner with, when we're talking about community engagement, but really looking at the little mom and pop shops and those, as I call them, sister Uras of the community, finding out, the people that are the real stakeholders that live in community. When we're really, deliberate about bringing them in and intentional, that's when we can really see the fair and equitable development that we want.
Great response. And, to piggyback on that community engagement, some of the facilities that Brian talked about, and they were underutilized. There was roughly 200 to 250,000 square feet of underutilized built buildings built facilities at Fair Park. And we've started to reactivate those. We've got a new operator at the Children's Aquarium. It used to be managed by the Dallas Zoo. Now we've got an international operator, Oceanarium, that is kind of reactivated, re-energized it, and they started to invest in it. And that investment is based on some best practices that they brought, but it's also based on the fact that they did come in and listen to not only us, but they actually had, we've got a robust community engagement process, and we recognize that we can't do everything alone. So we lean on our partners, not only our campus partners, and we've started to call Fair Park a campus as opposed to individual collection of all these individual entities. We want everybody to recognize that there's shared experiences. And so when you come to the park, we want you to utilize a variety of different things. If you're coming to go to Texas Discovery Gardens to look at the butterflies, why not go and see the fish at the aquarium and do a couple of other new activities that Zoceanarium has brought. But then before you leave the park, go check out the African American Museum and see some of the fabulous exhibits and some of their partnerships. They brought some Smithsonian exhibits to first time they've been west of the Mississippi. And then before you leave, go to the DAR or go to Hall Estate, and then you can circle back and come back to see Hamilton or Wicked. So the reality is that we want this to be an all-day event, and then walk across the street to where David has just built some new condos and hang out with some of those small mom and pop restaurants, because what we're trying to do is create a community asset, but you can't create a community asset if you bring in ideas. And I think that's what Dr. Drew was saying, is you can't come in with prescribed, we've already baked this, it's fully baked. And I think that's the same thing Desiree was saying, is it's got to be of the place, but it's got to be part of the place. And I think that's what all the panelists are talking about, is how do you become part of that solution by taking your design principles, your expertise, but opening it up and being a little bit of, showing a little bit of vulnerability, but the ability and authenticity to make sure that you're receptive to what you're hearing from people that have lived experiences that may be similar, but not exactly yours. Is there anything that David or Desiree or Brian wants to add to kind of the social equity piece? I know we've got a little bit of time, so before we get to the last question, I just want to make sure that we wrap up and make sure that we touch on all aspects of that from our panelists. I want you guys to hear from their expertise, because they do bring a wealth of knowledge to the table. David, looks like you want to say something.
Sure. Yeah. I'll say a couple things, right? So, what you've heard this morning is really the vision for where we want to go, what we want to achieve. But none of this is going to be possible without your involvement, right? I'm so happy that you're engaged at this early stage of your career. Here you are, high school students, right? But a lot of the developments that we're talking about are going to take 5, 10 years or more, right? As you mature and really figure out what role you're going to play as an adult, you'll have an opportunity to weigh in, both as a voter, right, and as a community participant. So now that you've been introduced to some of the issues, some of the events, I just encourage you, look out for meetings that are happening, look out for posts that you might find online, and chime in, offer your thoughts, because you will help shape what Fair Park and South Dallas ultimately become for future generations.
A very valid point. And one of the things that we've done is looking at some best practices, but we've actually started to engage students in going down to the middle schools, because some of the things that we're working on from a master planning standpoint, from a design standpoint, they will be using them when they get to adult age. So we want to make sure that we've got their voices heard now so that we can impact it. You can't always go to the same usual suspects or the same, you need gender diversity, ethnic diversity, but you also need age diversity, because you've got to hear everybody's voice to make sure that you guys are part of the future solution. And David is right. Dallas makes 40-year plans. Some of the things that you guys are listening to and part of, and I've seen some of the stuff that you guys do across CityLab as a collective. These things happen over 40 years. DART is a 40-year activity. DFW just celebrated its 40th year, and it's a major economic driver. Fair Park has a 20-year master plan with five-year increment phases. So the things that are happening inside the park will affect outside of the park. So make no mistake, the things that we're talking about, the things that Brian's talking about with the systems. Fair Park was built for a 5-year flood, and we actually have about 5 or 10 of those a year. So, and climate change is real. We are all in the design profession, and sustainability is about how do we impact that and how do we mitigate that. So you got to recognize in some of these buildings that were built back in the 30s, they have systems that were not updated since the 50s. So we have to look at that as well. How do we invest in that? But how do you, as future planners, policymakers, architects, put your voices in that? And please get involved and get engaged, because your voice is critical. And now that you have some knowledge, some expertise, and some exposure to the profession, you bring a level of expertise that your peer groups will listen to and gravitate to. You guys are the future leaders of what's going to happen. You may elect to leave the city. I would love to have your expertise stay in this metroplex and grow this into the city that I think it can become. But wherever you may land, because I, like Brian, am not a native of Dallas, but I've been here 20 years and I pour into this city because I believe in it. And so I want you guys to do the same thing. We still have a few more minutes. Is there anything Desiree or Brian wants to add before we get to the last question?
Just when it comes to social equity, like you mentioned, for all the long-term plans that the city and other agencies have in place, don't be discouraged about the things that you can do in the short term. Fair Park is like you said, a massive park that, with all of these phenomenal people that are on this call as well that are in the community that may not have the social media presence or whatever the case may be, they are more than willing and more than welcoming to things that are short term with good intentions. So I would say the social equity it can start small and grow as long as it's done with the right intentions. So it starts in that, and it starts in inserting yourself in that community as far as being vulnerable to what social equity looks like to them.
Thank you.
And I would just kind of encapsulate that, as an architect and designer, really just want to impress on the students that we are really conduits and mediators between developers, owners, and the community. And so it's incumbent upon us as designers to really engage the community to make sure that their voice is heard, and that the things that are going to impact them long beyond our presence in the project will kind of be implemented in the project. Because, as architects, we're a part of a project just for a few years. And as Darren mentioned, these are, 20, 30, 40-year possibilities. And so really to understand that these projects live longer than you, longer than the life of your involvement in the project. And so really to gain the impact, gain the interest and the input from the community is vitally important to any project, because as architects, we're designing spaces for human experience.
All right, perfect. I hope we didn't step on the last question a little bit, but this is all related to what we're talking about. And I think it's all related to what Kimberly talked about last night, is how do you, as an individual that's going through this pathway, be it urban planning, be it sustainability, be it architecture, how do you see yourself fitting into that solution in the future? And I think what you're hearing is there's a variety of different ways. As an architect, you can do a variety of different things. As an urban planner, you can actually physically plan, you can be a part of policy discussions, but you can be part of that community engagement. You can take and do the research and take your experiences and be flexible and fluid, because your life experiences actually mean a lot to everybody. Don't discount what you bring to the equation, and don't think your voice isn't important. So I want to make sure that the students recognize, and I think it goes back to the question that Mr. Goldstein kind of mentioned earlier when we were having a pre-conversation, is what is your personal mission statement, and what do you want to do? And be comfortable knowing that you don't have to know all the answers. You may change careers, but you will have an education that's well-grounded in the ability to look at things from a level and from a height that other people don't look at. And so you can look at it from bird's eye view, but then you can get down into the grass and look at it at weed level as well. So I want you guys to recognize that you have a lot of insight as well as creativity that's going to help develop the future of our cities so that they're more inclusive and more equitable, and that we don't have pockets of cities that have been disengaged, disconnected, and underinvested in the future. With that, I think I'm going to ask Bella to ask our last question.
Yes. So this question is for Dr. Booker Drew. How can our community, the neighbors, the city, professionals, and youth connect in a meaningful effort to create a more fair and equitable development that takes the best practices of existing programs like the state fair, the input of surrounding communities, and looks to the future?
You know, I mentioned a couple of things earlier, but I want to add, two things that I think are very important. One is my research love, which is this ideal of social capital. I think that we have to be very intentional about understanding the power of relationships. So for you as students, how do you start thinking about, Brian said earlier about your connection to developers and to architects and all of these different types of industries. How are you building your networks? And if we're going to do community engagement, well, we can't do it in isolation where it's about just building it with people that are homogeneous or familiar to us. It really is about how do we start doing what's called bridging social capital? How do we connect to people that are very different than us? If we're going to really have meaningful community and have an inclusive community, it is really thinking about how do we connect to people, again, that are similar to us, but also very different in that bonding social capital. And the last piece that I don't think we take into account a lot as we're looking at community engagement is advocacy. What does it really look like for us to partner with community and not speak for them, but to speak with them, and thinking about this ideal of shared power, not this ideal of I'm coming in to take over and tell you what I think you need to do, but really thinking about the ways in which we work with people collectively and collaboratively. So how do we advocate? And as you're talking about policy, one of the things that we don't always marry together well in community is thinking about not just the engagement and bringing people in, but because of the barriers and systems that they deal with, there is a real need for us to be able to advocate and voting, as David said, and really thinking about ways that we can shape policy that impacts communities, because we can bring everybody together and do this kumbaya, and that's wonderful. But if we don't start really addressing the policies that are impacting their everyday lives, we're going to continue to have these conversations. And so it is about making sure that we're listening, and it is about the historical and cultural piece, but it's also about how do we build these meaningful relationships and advocate with people and not for them.
Hey, David, I would like to ask you, as kind of a representative of an owner agency that's kind of responsible for investing from public dollars, how do you like to receive that kind of public input? How would you like to work with the community, kind of feeding off of what Bella's question was?
Interesting. So I think we do it in a number of ways, right? I think from a planning perspective, when we're looking at communities, when we're looking at the city overall, we want to gather your input on where should the city be going? Where should we be placing certain activities, whether it be the parks, the schools, the jobs, you name it, right? And a lot of that work is going on right now as part of Forward Dallas, right? Which is the city's long-term planning effort. But as we start to work on specific projects, when developers are bringing projects forward to us, we will ask for community input, right? Is this the type of project that you'd like to see? Take a look at the design. Take a look at who is being served. What are the properties that this new project will butt up against? All right. It's important to gather that input early so that if there's the opportunity to alter the design, we can do that without having to blow up the budget, right? Because what you'll find is, and I know many of our developers will get frustrated with this, community residents will come out and they'll say, well, you know, if we just had a barrier wall back here, or if we could just move this over here, it's like, okay, that's good, but we needed to hear that about a year ago, right? Or we needed to hear that earlier in the design process, right? So, so timing is everything, but when it's, I guess those are the two big things that I'd say, right? Overall planning, share with us early and often how you'd like to see the city be shaped. When it comes down to a specific project, attend the meetings, offer your thoughts, reach out to your elected officials, so that they have your input on what's most important to you.
Thanks a lot. We've got a few seconds left. Brian, is there anything you want to add, or Desiree, right before I wrap up?
I think just from a community engagement standpoint, I think as a designer, whenever we're doing community engagement events, really, I think it's incumbent upon us to really kind of keep our eyes and ears tuned to the room and be willing to kind of come early and stay late, because sometimes the most impactful community leaders aren't the most vocal in the meeting. So you need to be watching who are the people flocking around at the end of the meeting, who are they having conversations with, who's kind of directing the people on the peripheries of the meeting, because those are the people who you need to get on your team to get their input, because those are going to be the ones who have the sway to get the community feedback and get you the real feedback and sort of the underlying issues, and not just what's always vocalized in the meeting.
All right, thanks. My timer just went off. I want to thank the panelists for their wonderful insight, actually their passion. These guys do this and participate in these type of panels because they care and concern about the future of the communities that they're currently working in. Desiree is a proud Maverick and loves coffee, but now she is in another city doing the exact same thing in that other city. So with that, I turn it back over to Paul, I believe.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the second part of the summit. This is where we're going to roll out the AutoCast app for Fair Park. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce Andrew Arnold, Patricia Lopez, and Stephanie Jimenez.
My name is Andrew Arnold. I am a senior here at CityLab High School, and I'm in the architecture pathway. The CityLab Tour of Fair Park is a year-round learning experience that celebrates the unique art, architecture, history, and most importantly, the diverse peoples and cultures that call Texas home. This tour is designed to help tell the evolving story of Texas and its multicultural past, present, and future. My friend Patricia will now introduce the 8 stops that we created, and we hope you enjoy the CityLab Tour as you explore the many fascinating sites in Fair Park and the surrounding community.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, my name is Patricia Lopez. I'm a senior and I'm in the urban planning pathway. The 8 stops we've chosen are 1, Hall Estate, 2, Cotton Bowl, 3, Texas Star Ferris Wheel, 4, Big Tex, 5, African American Museum, 6, Texas Rufus, 7, 180 Craft House, and 8, Lanehart Lagoon. They were created during the fall semester of 2021 as a PBL project. Classes that took part include English, math, history, Spanish, and science, along with the CityLab pathways, architecture, urban planning, and environmental sustainability. The stops were then reviewed by a select group of industry experts, but also our own students and teachers. My friend Stephanie will now tell you how you can see the Fair Park stops that were chosen for the tour.
Thank you, Patricia. Hi, I'm Stephanie Jimenez, and I'm a junior in the urban planning path in CityLab High School. I work in the tour stop for the Juanita Craft House and Miss Dowdy class. And if you want to learn more about these amazing women who helped to create and change our city, please come join me when we meet in the breakout rooms. We will have 2 breakout rooms that you can visit from the next part of the program. Room 1 with Mr. Goldstein, we have the Half Estate, Texas State Farewell, African American Museum, and the Juanita Craft House. And the room 2 with Mr. Rivera, we will have the Cotton Bowl, Big Tex, Texas Waffles, and the Lagoon. My classmate will present each of the stops in our tour of Fair Park and the community for the next 40 minutes in the breakout rooms. Please choose which breakout room you want to visit. Remember that you can go from room to room and came back to the main room at any time. We hope you enjoy the students' presentations that we end at 12:10 when you can join back in the main room for the conclusion of today's activities. Thank you.
Juanita, she worked really hard to desegregate the Fair Park and to make it more fair for everybody to go ahead and enjoy their Fair Park. And also with her house and the civil rights movement, people like Dr. Martin Luther King came to the house to go ahead and make plans. That's their hotspot where they all came together, the civil rights leaders at the time, to make plans for us to what to do for the rights.
Great point, Cynthia Marie. So this house, which is now a landmark status, was certainly a very important stop in terms of issues that were going on in the day and having people like Martin Luther King come and visit here.
My name is Joseph Shores, and I am a junior, and I'm in the architecture pathway. And I believe that Juanita Craft's house is important because it was reflected on the Dolphin Heights neighborhood by being involved in the city council in desegregating the for African Americans during the 1950s. This is one of the many reasons why the Juanita Craft House is important, because the house would just be a normal house if it weren't for Juanita Craft and her leadership in the NAACP. Thank you.
Well put, Joseph. Let's listen to this video.
Juanita Jewel Shanks Craft was an American activist for over 50 years. Before Craft became an activist, she was the daughter of David and Eliza Balfour Shanks. Her father was a principal and her mother a teacher. Craft would be exposed to racial injustice from a young age, directly and indirectly. In 1918, her mother would suffer from tuberculosis, which would take her life, thanks to the fact that doctors would not see her for her race.
As you can see here, there's a picture of Juanita. The reason why this is important is because in the 1930s, Craft will go to join the National Association for Colored People. And in 1944, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling called for a voting where Juanita would be the first African-American woman to vote in a Dallas County primary election. She was also known for changing the state fair as we know it today. At the time, all African Americans were denied access to the state fair except for one day. Juanita changed the state fair by protesting a movement known as the NAACP Youth Council Advisor to end discrimination towards the African Americans in the state fair. By 1955, the state fair was desegregated, which allowed any race to attend the state fair without any penalty.
During 1950 and 1955, Craft also held protests against the University of Texas Law School and North Texas State University, previously known as University of Texas back then, for the segregation enforcements they had. Lawsuits were filed against these universities, where Craft would stand victorious. From 1954 to 1979, Juanita served 2 terms as a Democratic President Chairman, where she worked to improve the lives of Hispanics and Native Americans.
In conclusion, we learned that Juanita had a major impact on the city of Dallas. She was an activist for 50 years and she did a lot for Dallas. In 1930s, we learned that she joined the NAACP, and also that in 1944, she was the first African American woman to vote in the Dallas County primary election. And then also we learned that in 1950, she made a huge breakthrough by protesting towards the state fair to allow African Americans to attend the state fair whenever. And in 1955, that's whenever that became true, and it was a big success. From the 1950s to 1980s, she helped improve the lives of Hispanic and Native Americans as they were treated poorly. So overall, the reason why Juanita is very important and also has a museum in her house, she lived there for 50 years by the way, is because she was a huge impact on the city of Dallas. And without her, Dallas wouldn't be the same as we know it today. It would probably be very different without her.
We will always remember you as the woman who knew how to raise her voice in the face of corruption and inequality.
First of all, again, very powerful and such an important story to tell about the history of our city and changes in the right directions and moving towards this multiculturalism and inclusion and equity, where all people are treated as equals. Is just so important, and something that gives me great hope, knowing how our students are going to help us move forward, kind of like we heard in our panel discussion. I also saw there in the credits Miss Dowdy's name again. Thank you to Miss Dowdy, if you're on, for the wonderful work that was done in your English class in investigating this and so many other important topics. I want to go to the guide for a second to show you where the Juanita Craft House is located. Students, help me out here. Is this in Dolphin Heights?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia Marie. And I heard, I believe it was Darren James telling us that there's dozens of communities in and around Fair Park. So again, this is a very diverse part of our city. Let's see if the guide, there it is. So we're looking here, the first pen is here on the CityLab. And then we see Fair Park here that has, we actually have 8 total stops in our first iteration of this tour. And as I mentioned, this one is a little bit of an outlier. Here's the Juanita Craft House. And you can see it's in pretty close proximity to Fair Park. And this is where she lived, as Joseph reminded us, for more than 50 years. And as we continue this investigation, hopefully the CityLab students will continue to look at sites not only on the Fair Park campus, but also in and around, because there's a lot of very important sites. I know that some of our students investigated Jubilee Park, and there's so many communities, vibrant communities around Fair Park that are certainly part of kind of the success of this part of town and this iconic group of buildings.
We have a potluck upstairs if you get a break.
Okay, so let's open.
All right.
Okay. Craft House, any closing thoughts from any of you about this, the structure, about Fair Park, or the importance of Juanita Craft? Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone and just kind of let you know where we're going from here. We're about to wrap up in the breakout rooms, and we'll have a few closing thoughts and some awards to give away to wrap up the public part of the 2021 CityLab Summit. So in just a couple of minutes, you guys can go back to the breakout room, and I think we'll hear from Mr. Rivera, some closing thoughts, and myself. I want to thank all our students for your hard work and research on these various sites at Fair Park. Thank you for sharing them with us. And also want to thank all our visitors today to the CityLab Summit. I sure hope you enjoyed learning about Fair Park. I hope you'll use this app to kind of help you navigate Fair Park in the future. And thank you for your support of our school. It's deeply appreciated and makes a huge impact on our students and our community. So thank you.
What stood out the most to you
During this presentation?
during the research of tickets?
So what really stood out to me the most was when Big Tech's burned down in 2012, I believe, and how like a lot of these people were trying to reconstruct it and just make it better, not just design-wise, but also make it more sturdy and still keep the the iconic look, but somehow renovate it to make people feel like, hey, he's back.
Hi, this is Laura Keys from UNT. Did you give any thought as we see how much Big Tech's talks about the past or as a symbol of the past? Is there and did you have any ideas or brainstorm ways in which Big Tech's could be an icon for a future?
So this is honestly, it's surprising to see what can happen in the future, because Dallas is kind of shaping into this more modernized city, and it's just like it's unbelievable because you don't really know what can happen, and big text is like a part of that too.
Maybe holograms or something.
More tech savvy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
One thing,
absolutely. Great ideas.
yeah,
The text of Woofers is a mythological chimera that is made of like basically of the main staples of Texas livestock. So like what the Woofers is made of is like it contains a horse neck, a turkey tail, a pig body, duck wings, a sheep's head, and of course a pair of Texas Longhorns. And it was originally created in 1936 for the Texas Continual Exposition in Dallas. The original sculpture was damaged in 1941. The Woofers in the Fair Park is a recreation of the original.
okay. Any questions?
I'm wondering what made you guys in particular pick the Woofus for your stop?
Just because it's like a great thing to like a mythological creature, just like a thing to truly mesmerize, like how something was invented and like how it was like created from like different parts of animals.
I really didn't know what it was, so like I knew I've seen it before, but I didn't really knew like details and how it was made. So it was like really interesting learning about it.
I like the sound of the name. It just sounded interesting to me.
The last stop in this breakout room is the Leonhardt Lagoon.
So the Leonhardt Lagoon was created in 1936 and named after the naturalist Dorothy Leonhardt. 50 years later, artist Patricia Johansson, my bad, introduced the sculptures inside the lagoon. So to put those there, they actually drained the lagoon. In the process, she also introduced more native plants into the lagoon area to help out the ecosystem. You can also ride little swan paddle boats around.
Thank you very much, Ben. And we're open to any questions that you might have.
What is the condition of the lagoon now?
Yeah, so overall, it is pretty self-sufficient. There's a whole lot of like natural plants. There's not much algae. You can see through the water. So it is still in fairly good condition. It's pretty self-sufficient.
I'm excited because this holiday season, they're doing Enchant, which has millions of lights. And having that landscape green space, having that water feature within what is genuinely a lot of beautiful iconic architecture and concrete breaks it up, brings in something that's so natural feeling and is so peaceful.
Well said, well said. We have a student here, freshman, that is asking, is the lagoons, like how is the lagoon self-sufficient?
So self-sufficient, it means that it's a stable ecosystem. Basically, waste is constantly being utilized, right? So the prey and predator are both like at a balanced equilibrium. So there's a consistent, sustainable ecosystem that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the extra detail there. And now to a certain point, that question goes along with the buildings. It's interesting also to think throughout all the buildings that have been there for almost 100 years, how can we in the future have them be carbon neutral, maybe, zero emission, maybe, kind of like creating this urban habitat that it's self-sustaining, if you want to call it. So that's a good closure to our Fair Park presentations of all the different stops. Thanks a lot for the analysis.
Thank you very much. If Mr. Rivera is on, I would love for him to start.
Thanks everyone for spending the morning of a beautiful Friday with us. I know for many of you that are super busy, this is not an easy thing to do, so we appreciate you so much. Our students have been working hard for the last 2 months on this, and some of them for a whole year preparing it. So we thank you as well. I'm gonna just say this really quickly in Spanish. Le agradecemos a todas las personas que están disponibles, que están aquí presentes. Gracias por participar. Los estudiantes trabajaron, algunos por 2 meses y otros por 1 año entero preparando este evento. Así que le agradecemos a todos que nos tengan aquí. Y lo último, el app tiene todas las paradas disponibles en español. Así que esté interesado, baje el app del App Store, de la tienda de apps, de aplicaciones. El app se llama Autocast. O-T-O-C-A-S-T. That's it, Mr. Goldstein. Go for it.
Mr. Rivera, did you have a couple of awards that you wanted to make?
Oh, yeah. This is the good part. This is the good part. Yes, thank you for reminding me. So, let's see. Okay, so really quick, we had Mr. Goldstein, how many projects students submitted? Was it more than 20, right?
More than 20.
Yes, I believe I got to see or to evaluate about 25, and that was just the second batch, the second half. So we got a lot of different entries, and here are the top 2 entries that we want to recognize really quick. So we're going to start with the honorable mention, if you want to call it. It's going to be 2021 CityLab Honor Award, Outstanding Contributions to the CityLab Fair Park Tour. This one goes for the Stop Big Techs, and it goes for Samira Chavez. So an applause to Samira, please. There you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. And the next award, the second award that we have for today, it is, once again, 2021 CityLab Summit Honor Award for Outstanding Contributions to the CityLab Fair Park Tour. For the Juanita Craft House Stop, we have Stephanie Jimenez, Joseph Schwartz, and Cynthia Marie Mendoza. The 3 of them, an applause, please. All the students that completed these stops did an amazing job. These 4 students stood out in their projects. So we thank them a lot for their effort and their projects.
Congratulations, students, and thank you to all of you for your contributions, and hopefully we'll continue working on this app in the future. Mr. Rivera, while you're on, I'd love to, or definitely want to thank you for your passion, for your energy and your commitment to our school. Thank you so much for all you've done to make this year's CityLab Summit a huge success, and for everything that you do here at CityLab. To those of you that don't know me, I am Peter Goldstein. I am an architect and the co-founder of CityLab, and I'm so proud of all our students for making this year's summit the success that it's been. The summit, this is our 5th one. It started in year 0, and it's a unique opportunity for our students to engage with the community to address really important issues and challenges, like this year's discussion about equity, about inclusion in the built environment. During our panel discussion today, I probably heard the term community mentioned at least 20 times. This is so important, in the idea of listening to one another, like Dr. Booker True was encouraging us to do, and to get our students to become engaged and involved in the community. So students, we appreciate all that you do, and we're looking for you to help us move forward in a positive direction. Real quickly here to wrap up, I'd like to thank my co-chair, Amy Hicks, who did a great job putting together this year's summit and organizing last night's inspiring talk by Kimberly Dowdell. Was absolutely wonderful. Jared Davis and the entire CityLab High School Foundation Board, who puts this together for us every year, and Marilyn Rutner and Christine Schwope, thank you so much for your guidance in helping us organize this year's summit. I also want to thank our amazing CityLab staff, led by Principal Lynn Smith. You guys are inspiring to me, and all the students who participated in the including the Student Summit Planning Committee that was led by Bella Oliver, who's created a design charrette that the students will be working on later today. Thank you, Bella, for all your hard work. Elhanan Geller, behind the scenes, who's been working tirelessly on the technology in so many different parts. Thank you, Elhanan, for all your help. And Stephanie, again, thank you for your participation, the translations into Spanish. That is so important. I'm talking about multiculturalism, and your contributions are deeply appreciated. I also want to thank all of our sponsors, including our community partners, Fair Park First, and also Koshi Dingra from Talk STEM and Eric Feinstein from Odocast, who helped us put together this wonderful app. I want to end with a quote here real quickly from Juanita Kraft. She was the subject of one of the studies or the stops on our tour, and she said, "It is my hope that after I am gone, people of all backgrounds will visit my house and come to understand that individuals can make a difference and to appreciate the importance of service to community and nation. You don't have to be rich to make an impact, but you have to work and you have to care." Thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend.